If you're building a SaaS app in 2025, you need a solid stack that covers everything: hosting, a database, background jobs, emails, authentication, and payments. In this video, I'll walk through a modern SaaS stack for 2025 that I use to deploy monetized web apps and monetized native apps for iPhone and Android that's fast to develop prototypes for, that's minimal maintenance, and is dirt cheap to deploy, all while allowing you to transform your quickly developed prototypes into production deployments on fully scalable cloud infrastructure. The core of our app will be a React Next.js app deployed on Vercel. This is a safe and popular choice, and being a popular choice has a lot of advantages. There's a lot of great community support. You know you can accomplish almost anything since someone else will have accomplished it before, and AI will have been trained on many examples, so you can leverage AI to develop more effectively. I also really like Next.js because everything's in one language, Typescript, and the client and server code can live right next to each other, along with the API code. This greatly simplifies build and deployment infrastructure compared to frameworks like Rails, Django, Laravel, which are all great, but adding the second language can complicate your tooling. We can also deploy Next.js apps to Vercel, which is a really great platform as a service. It has a lot of great features like Git push to deploy and logging set up out of the box. And it has a very generous free tier. You can pay absolutely nothing and deploy a lot of websites, even if you get some traffic. And if you need some more features like longer log windows, the pro tier isn't too much either. I think it's $20 a month. And the other thing I really like about React is that if we want to write native apps, we can write React Native. We can't reuse all the code exactly. The UI is different. However, we can share a lot of logic code, and the mental model is very similar, which makes porting web apps to native apps a lot simpler. The next part of our SaaS stack will be the database, where I recommend Firestore, which is part of the Firebase line of products owned by Google. It's a document store where you have less data integrity than something like a SQL database since you don't create a schema, but I think it lets you iterate faster when you're developing a prototype or an MVP or still really changing a lot of the features. I think you can migrate to a SQL database if you need better data integrity later, but the advantages of how fast you can iterate on a document store outweigh those schema advantages. Firebase also has really good integration with Google Cloud. So if you want to use things like Google Cloud Functions, which lets you run background jobs similar to AWS Lambda, it's very tightly integrated. There's a lot of examples of using things like Firebase and with React and React Native. And overall, it just kind of checks so many boxes. Its big disadvantage is it's not open source. That's why a lot of people use Supabase, and other people prefer other document stores like MongoDB or a SQL database. But I think the tight integration between Firebase and Google Cloud and Firebase and React Native, the many examples existing, outweigh all the other considerations. And speaking of all those great integrations Firebase has, our next consideration is going to be auth, which is user sign-in, almost certainly needed, and background jobs. Almost certainly you need background jobs. Something as simple as a user cancels the premium, you need to say, oh, when their cancellation is up, then mark them as no longer premium user. That might be a background job if they expire in, say, 10 days. So Firebase makes both of these things super easy. Firebase has a whole authentication library with password sign-in, Google sign-in, Facebook sign-in, email magic link sign-in. Very easy. Don't need to use another moving part. And then for background jobs, Firebase doesn't handle it directly, but its tight integration with Google Cloud makes it very easy since you can use Google Cloud Functions. Very similar to AWS Lambda, lets you run some code in the background at some time. And with Google Cloud Functions, all your code, your background jobs are in the same repo with your client code, your API code, and then your background functions. So once again, you can move everything to your project in one repo with this stack. It's really nice for productivity. The next thing we're going to cover is email provider. You will probably want to email your users. You probably need two types of emails: marketing emails to do things like announce new product features, and transactional emails for things like a user forgot a password, something they did in the app that triggers an email. Now, you can use Mailgun for transactional emails. That's what I've used. It works. I've had no problem with it. I've also tried tools like SendGrid, also work, but I'm just familiar with Mailgun and use it for my projects. Now, you can just use something like Mailgun because it lets you send emails programmatically for transactional emails and for marketing emails. But you might want to consider another tool for marketing emails that let you do things like A/B tests and do some more analytics on how emails are performing. So there's where I would look to a tool like ConvertKit, which lets you tag your different email audience into cohorts, see open rates, and see A/B tests and how they perform. That's optional. It depends on how important email marketing is to your SaaS, but it's certainly worth consideration. I am still curious to try some new transactional email providers because I'm not thrilled with the email design tools in Mailgun. I know there's some new up and coming startups like Loops. They claim to have a better email editing experience. I would love to try that out, but I try to keep things simple and I just haven't had the time to experiment with upgrading from Mailgun to Loops and deciding if it's better. So if you have experience with that, let me know. The last part of the stack we're going to consider is payments and how your users can pay you. While we don't technically need to monetize your SaaS to call it a SaaS, certainly many of us aspire to make some money from SaaS, maybe even turn it into a full-fledged business. So again, I go with very popular choices. For web, I'm going with Stripe. It's probably the number one company in this category. It has very good developer docs. It's very easy to get started for one-time payments, subscriptions, or invoices. You can't really go wrong with Stripe unless some people have complained it's too easy to get banned for mysterious reasons. But I think if you mostly stick within their rules, you will avoid that. For mobile, for native, I use RevenueCat. Technically, you don't need to. And my first iOS app written in Swift, I just used Apple StoreKit API. However, I did switch to React Native so that I could, again, keep more of my code in the same language, write a web app in React, and it was just easier to write the native app in React Native. And then I also get the benefit of getting Android. Now, I do use Expo, which is a very popular React Native framework, and the only official way to hook up in-app purchases with Expo is with RevenueCat. I'm sure other options are technically possible. You could probably technically get it to work without RevenueCat, but you can either use the very easy and established docs to hook up RevenueCat, or you can adventure into the wilderness of doing it without RevenueCat. I chose the former option, and it's very easy, and you can even hook up Stripe to RevenueCat and then keep all your payment infos in one dashboard. That's a summary of the stack. The big advantage is it's very productive because your client code, your server-side code, your API call code, and your background job code all live in the same repo right next to each other. They can all share logic code. You can even have multiple projects and React Native projects hooked up in a monorepo with something like Turbo Repo, which lets you share code between projects without dealing with complicated NPM package management. Overall, this stack is really quick because Firebase is a very easy database to rapidly iterate and change things as you go. Being a document store and having all your code in one place also makes it faster to iterate, and having all your code in one language on platform as a service that make it very easy to deploy is another reason the stack is very easy to maintain. And on top of all this, it's very cheap. Vercel is free for most basic use cases. Firebase is similarly free until you get a decent amount of usage. Mailgun costs about $30 a month, and Stripe and RevenueCat will take a percentage of your payments. But overall, if you don't have much traffic, you're pretty much just paying for Mailgun, which is a fixed price. And it's very affordable to spin up many projects and experiment, see what's working, what's not, without committing a lot of financial resources. So this is my stack. It's obviously my opinion. It's a very subjective thing. It evolves over time, and I'd love to hear your opinions if you agree or disagree with any of my choices. Thanks for watching.